I'm eager to get into the text. Remember last week we started talking about Lazarus, basically a series within the series of encounters. But I do want to reiterate the serve day, November 4th. We need a couple hundred people to be here ready to serve. We'd like you to sign up ahead of time so that we have an idea of where to fill different spots, what spots need to be filled. So please get signed up today, tomorrow, sometime in the next couple of days so we can make good plans. I mentioned we're in the series Encounters, and it is simply a walk through different moments in the Gospels where Jesus came near to someone, and as a result of his nearness, their life was transformed. Last week, we started talking about when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, although we didn't actually get that far into the narrative. And I want to do a little bit of a review, and then we'll get to part 2 of Hospitable. But I also want to go ahead and tell you that I'm going to turn this into 3 messages. And so I will do part 3 next week because there's so much good stuff in here. I didn't want to rush the ending, right? So here's just a reminder of what we talked about last week. There were really 4 prominent components of the message last week. The first component is that Lazarus, Mary, and Martha were dear friends of Jesus. They had cultivated relationship with him. Martha as a servant who took her skills and gifting and she put it on the table to serve the Lord. Mary who sat at his feet and hung on every word. Mary who was an extravagant worshiper. And Lazarus who was just simply a dear devoted friend. And I made this statement and I'll make it again. May it be the dream of everyone connected to this house that our name in heaven is synonymous with dear friendship. How many of you say that's what I want to be? Like, I'm glad he knows every hair on my head. I'm glad he's numbered my days. But when my name comes up in heaven, I want the asterisk beside it to be, that is a dear friend of mine. And on top of that, we learned in their dear friendship that even though you are dear friends of Jesus, from time to time, even the most devoted of people experience difficulty. We go through struggle. We go through pain. We go through sickness. We go through loss. We endure so much of what everybody else in life endures. But because of that friendship, we know that when calamity comes, we have the ability to reach out to our advocate, to send a message to Jesus, knowing that he hears us and he moves in faith. People who are friends of God, we might go through struggle, but we don't fret, right? We don't panic. We don't freak out. We don't lose hope. We don't succumb to the overarching idea that things are not going to be good. We know that we have an advocate in the Lord, even when we go through difficulty. The third component is that when they sent a message to Jesus, Jesus delayed 2 days. And within that, we talked about the question that often comes up, why did Jesus delay? And we brought that into our own world with the reality that a lot of us ask the question, why? Based on the things we've experienced, that didn't go the way I thought. Why? They left. Why? They didn't love me the way they should. Why? I suffered that pain. Why? And the problem with asking the question why is that you will never find satisfaction in why. We weren't born to know why. We were born to know who. Our soul and spirit aren't wired to be satisfied with answers. Only the answer can satisfy. Facts, information, and even understanding are not meant to make our heart full. That can only be accomplished by a person. Jesus is the who, he is the answer, and he is the person. Can I get a yes to that? I'm reviewing because I need us to hold all of this in our thoughts as we progress in the text, because all of these are so intrinsically tied to one another. The fourth component last week is that Mary and Martha and now the deceased Lazarus are in an area known as Bethany, which is a greater area known as Judea. And the last time Jesus was there, he made some statements about being the Messiah and the Son of God that others considered blasphemous. So they picked up stones and they wanted to kill him. So when Jesus starts talking about going back to that area to help Lazarus, his disciples object. Hey, why would we go back there? They did not want us. They don't like you. They don't agree with you. They have resisted you. They have rejected you. They are volatile toward you. Jesus, they want to do you harm. And we learned one of the most important truths about the Lord. Jesus visits inhospitable places on behalf of hospitable people. And we are those people. As God scans the earth, as it says in Chronicles, when God looks across the planet, He is looking for a heart that is devoted to Him. And when He finds one of those, He shows His strength through that heart. When God looks at the earth and darkness pervades, if He can see a person who is hospitable to Him, that is light that He can ride in on, and He can change a family, He can change a home, He can change a school, He can change a city, He can change a nation, He can change a world. And as long as Cornerstone is at this place and we have a knee bent to the Lord and a heart postured in friendship toward Him and we honor Him, then we can rest assured that this city is not without hope. And no matter how dark it gets around us, God Himself will invade the darkness on behalf of those who carry the light. Oh, yeah. Listen, I hope y'all ready today. Hope y'all ready today. So now we push on into the text, and I want to pray, and then we'll get into the text. Lord, we invite you into this moment. And we prayed it before service, but Jesus, I just want to say it even more publicly. May every stronghold that has exalted itself against you be torn down today. Lord, may every disappointment and discouragement that's led to disenchantment, may it be broken off of us today. May we be healed and whole. Lord, as we look at you through this text, through this encounter, may our faith be renewed. May our hearts be restored. Lord, would you do supernatural things in us today? In the name of Jesus, amen. So I just want to reiterate, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Now, we're not going to get there today. We're going to get part of the way there. We're going to go where we left off last week. Last week, we stopped with Jesus saying, I am going to go to Bethany to take care of this situation with Lazarus. Now we are going to start talking from when He arrives at Bethany. John 11:17 says, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, remember Bethany is where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. He was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Let me just set the time increments that we are looking at right now. The people in that region of Bethany did not want Jesus. Jesus enters anyway. And we find out in chapter 10 that after they picked up stones, He went into the wilderness beyond the Jordan. So He went a ways outside of the community and city into a bit of isolation. Message gets to him that Lazarus is sick. He waits 2 days, right? Now, by the time he gets to Bethany and these conversations start, we find that Lazarus has been dead 4 days. So at a minimum, this has been a 6-day process from the time that Jesus got the message until He finally arrived. Is that decent math? Is that all right? 2 + 4, 6. Got it. All right. 6 days at a minimum is a lot of time to think. 6 days is a lot of time to wrestle. 6 days is a lot of time to ponder. It's a lot of time to have conversation. It creates a lot of margin for dialogue and discussion. And as we read the text, we find out that there was some dialogue taking place. Let's go to John 11, verses 20 through 24. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet Him. But Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. That sounds like a promise, doesn't it? Yes, Martha said. You think right now she's grabbing a hold of something in faith. Yes, Martha said. He will rise when everyone else rises at the last day. There's some miscommunication here in this exchange. They aren't speaking on the same level. They aren't on the same wavelength. Their minds aren't necessarily synced. Now, I do want to notice that Martha expressed faith on several fronts. She said, if you would have been here, he wouldn't have died. Like implying you had the ability to keep him from dying. She expressed faith by saying, even now I know God will give you whatever you ask. So once again, Martha is expressing some faith. Within those two statements, she is saying, I believe Jesus in your miracle working capability. And I believe Jesus even when things seem impossible. With you, nothing is impossible. And even after that, she reiterates, Jesus, I believe you're the Messiah. I believe you're the Son of God. So this is a woman of faith. She is demonstrating faith. But did you notice how the conversation concluded? Jesus makes a statement, I will cause Lazarus to rise. Lazarus will rise. Martha says, yes, I know. And then she starts talking about the afterlife. She starts talking about eternal inheritance. She starts talking about what's going to take place in eternity. She starts talking about what's going to happen in heaven. Jesus is making a statement. We know how the story ends. He raised Lazarus from the dead. Jesus was saying, I'm about to get that boy up out the grave. She says, oh, when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus. But you're here. Like she's just going to heaven in her thoughts. She's going to another place and another time. Can we talk candidly this morning? I want to talk honest this morning. Disappointment, difficulty, unmet expectations, seemingly unanswered prayers, sickness that doesn't seem to have an end, death, trauma. These experiences have a way of shifting our theology, of changing the way we think about God. They have a way of becoming a filter through which we read Scripture the rest of our lives. They have a way of becoming borders within which we pray the rest of our lives. They have a way of becoming an overlay of how we look at God and how we see the world. Difficulty, disappointment, it not going the way I wanted, all of those why questions have a tendency in many, many people that have faith, people that love the Lord, people that care deeply about walking with Him. It has the capacity to change the way we read, the way we pray, the way we think, the way we view the world. And I've observed it in myself. And I've been in church pretty much my entire life. And I've watched it happen over and over and over again to people who love God, people who are faithful. And usually there are a couple of theological shifts that happen when we suffer disappointment, when we have to wait longer than we expected. A couple of shifts in our mindset that I want today to tear down. The first one is we will shift from God will to God can. Now don't misquote me. Don't put words in my mouth. Don't assign more meaning to what I'm saying than exactly what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with saying God can. It is a stone cold fact. You can take it to the bank. God can. God can heal that sickness. There ain't a sickness He can't heal. There's not a bondage He can't break, right? There's not a marriage He can't restore. There isn't an addiction that He can't liberate somebody from, right? There isn't something lost that He can't recover. There is nothing too far gone for Him. God can, right? You can clap right there. I think you feel like I'm about to set you up. That is true, and it is perfectly appropriate, absolutely acceptable, highly encouraged to make strong statements that God can do it. Nothing wrong with saying God can, unless we are saying He can as this milquetoast, timid platitude that God can do anything, but I don't really believe He will. He can becomes a problem when it serves as a defense mechanism because we have become passive and no longer have the faith to contend that He will. And it can be the same two words, but have drastically different meaning in the soul. He can. He can do it. I wonder how many times we have said He can do it with resignation and defeat on our lips. There's nothing wrong with saying He can. But we've got to believe He will. I believe that I am standing in a room with people who have been through some battles. I believe that I'm standing in a room with some people who have suffered some setbacks. I believe that I am in a room with people that know what it's like to pray and to wait. Some in this room have endured disappointment, but I also believe that I am in a room with people who refuse to offer up a passive He can in the circumstances they're facing. I believe I'm in a room of battle-tested people, people that have gone through the fires and the waters, people that have endured suffering and struggle, and you've come out on the other side, and more than ever your resolve is He will do it. He will heal. He will be faithful. He will meet my needs. He will provide. He will conquer. He will overcome. He will get me through. He will tear down the walls. He will break the back of the enemy. He will restore what the enemy tried to steal. He will. He will. He will. He will. He will. Come on, somebody needs to say He will. Oh, you need to say it to whatever you're hoping for. Go ahead and say it. He will. I need some He will people in the room. But what happens a lot of times is we will take things like God's sovereignty and we will contort it into a problem. Many, because of disappointment, start using God's sovereignty as a loophole because they've lost the faith to contend for God's promises. Well, God, it's all up to God. It's up to Him. I mean, I have no control over the situation. Never mind that Mary and Martha petitioned Jesus. They beckoned Him. They called to Him. None of this happens if they don't send a message to Him. Right? Jesus set out to heal him, but the initiation of that healing began with two people that said, He's going to come do something. He's going to move on my behalf. Don't misinterpret. I want to reiterate. Don't misquote me. But there's some of our older saints in the room that come from a different era, and they remember what it was like to tarry. They remember what it was like to contend. They remember what it was like to pray through. Anybody ever prayed through? They know what it's like to fast until something breaks in the heavenlies. They know what it's like to just hold the line until something shifts and alters. And then you got other folks in the room that'll say, well, what if it doesn't happen? What if it doesn't happen? Well, I know this, whether it does or it doesn't. Whether the healing comes or it doesn't. Whether the breakthrough takes place or it doesn't. I'm going to tell you where you're going to find me. You're going to find me with my toes on the line, looking at the giant that's in front of me, looking at death, looking at sickness, looking at brokenness, and I'm going to keep my toes right on that line, and I'm going to stare that thing in the eye, and with everything in me, I'm going to say, you don't belong. God will topple you. God will conquer you. God will overrun you. God will tear you down. Let it be said of me, and let it be said of us as a church, whatever happens in the end, you're going to know where to find us. You're going to find us locked in a place of faith, not backing up one bit. What if it doesn't happen? Well, what if it doesn't? But I know this, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down swinging. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down praying. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down fasting. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down quoting the scriptures. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down holding on to God for everything I've got. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to relent. I'm not going to back down. I'm not just going to accept. If it's supposed to go a certain way and that's the way it's going to go, so be it. But God is going to see me check in every single day with my faith, saying, you will do this, Lord. And I'll trust Him with my heart in the aftermath, whatever comes. But I sure don't want to, well, He can, and slip into passivity and just accept what the enemy's tried to bring against me. To just accept what this life throws at me. The second theological shift that many experience in the face of disappointment is that we take God's promises that are meant for here and now and we reassign them to heaven someday. I mean, that's in essence what she did. He said, I'm about to raise him. He will rise. She took a promise that He was making for right then and there, and she grabbed it and she threw it into heaven. Now, I can't wait to get to heaven. It's going to be awesome. But I'm not going to forfeit promises that I can have right now. I just want you to hear this. Peace that passes understanding is a promise for right here and right now. It's not just when we're walking through heaven, just hearing the nice streams and looking at the trees with the leaves that heal the nations that we have peace. No, you don't have to have stress now. No, you don't have to be panicked now. No, you don't have to be anxious now. You don't have to be worried now. You can have peace right now. Don't send it off into heaven. It's for you now. I don't guess y'all want peace. But I want it. I like peace. I know some folks like to fight and they like to scratch and claw and they like to always have an enemy and always have issues. But I kind of like peace and I can have it right now, so I'm going to have it. There's joy unspeakable and full of glory, and that is available for you right now. Some of you need to slap a smile on your face. Joy is for now. It's not just when we're dancing around the throne, singing in eternity in His radiant light. You can have joy now. You ain't got to live in depression. You ain't got to live in sorrow. You ain't got to live in defeat. You ain't got to live somber and melancholy. You can have a laugh in your belly that does not come from some joke in your environment, but it comes from a well of knowing that God's got me and the enemy can't touch me. Joy unspeakable and full of glory. God's promise for provision is now. It's not just for when we walk the streets of gold one day and we get our mansion in heaven. He promised provision now. He said, I'll take care of the birds of the air and I'll feed them. I'll clothe the flowers of the field. I'll take care of you. Some of you need to know you ain't got to live broke right now. You don't have to live always in lack right now. You don't have to be anxious and stressed about your job and your income all the time. He promises provision. Don't just give up on that. Don't just throw in the towel on that. Don't just accept your lot in that. Believe in faith that it isn't just streets of gold and I'm going to take a pickaxe and chip me off a little because I never knew what it was like to have anything in this life. But I am a person that is provided for right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and say this too, and it's a little harder to say, but healing is for now. It's not just when we get a glorified body in heaven some sweet day. Healing is for now. And I believe that healing is hitting this house. And I believe in for soul healing, spiritual healing, but I mean some physical healing. We're getting testimonies. Got a testimony Wednesday night of someone who had major thyroid issues. They thought it might be cancerous. They were beginning the treatment. They go to the doctor after receiving prayer a Sunday or two ago. Everything is fine. They're taking them off the medication because healing is available now. Oh, what if it don't happen? Listen, just put your toes on that line, sis. Just put them on that line. But we got to quit worrying about outcomes. We got to start worrying about where we're positioned and postured. I quit worrying about what's going to happen. I just want to be present and accounted for. And so don't allow disappointment to become a filter through which you see God. Don't allow it to become an overlay of how you read the scriptures. And look, I'm not some greenhorn up here. I'm not some born yesterday hayseed fall off the wagon. I know what I'm talking about. I've lived a little. I know I look young, but these gray hairs are every single day starting to defy my youth. November 28, 2015. I got a phone call in the middle of the night that my dad had died. Rewind to the December before, and I can remember to this day what it felt like, December 2014, when he called and said, they've diagnosed me with cancer and it's bad. Of course, anybody that's ever lived within that type of diagnosis knows that it sucks the life out of you. It's a gut punch. Your heart begins to race. You get short of breath. Your mind goes in a million different directions. And I don't know the amount of time between him saying it and me opening my mouth, but it was pretty brief. And I made the statement out of my mouth, you'll live and not die. I just began to speak faith into my dad. You'll live and not die. You'll see your 80s. I really believed in my heart that my dad was going to see 80. He was 63 at the time. I believed he was going to see 80. I believe that. So we go through the next 11 months, the chemotherapy, the radiation, and I watch my dad, who was always the life of the party. He was one of the most energetic, active men you would ever meet, and I watched his body deteriorate. I watched how the radiation affected him and the pain. I watched my dad, who just loved to cook and loved to throw big parties, and I watched him just barely being able to sip an Ensure down because of the pain that he was going through. But I sat on the couch with him with the blanket over him, and I watched an NCAA basketball tournament, and I sat there knowing my dad's going to live. We get into the summer. He has one of the more invasive surgeries you can have. He comes out on the other side of the surgery. I mean, I was in the hospital with him during that. He was saying all kind of crazy stuff. He was on so many medications. He was having conversations about things with me that never did happen. I mean, it was hard to watch. But then we got to the other side of that, and I watched my dad progress in health faster than the doctors predicted. And I thought, here we go. It's going to happen. He's going to live and not die. We get into the fall, and he has to go through some final preventative treatments. And his body just starts struggling again. And I go visit him just one random day, took off work, drove to Covington, sat in the living room with him. And something had changed in my dad. He had resigned himself to a fate. A couple of days later, my stepmom took him to the hospital. And as they were pulling out of the driveway, my dad said, this is the last time I'll see this place. But I still believed. He'll live and not die. We're getting ready to do youth convention that fall, that Thanksgiving week. I'm doing what my dad would have done. I was at work, not at his bedside, because that's where my dad would have wanted me to be. I spent the whole week before with him, went and did youth convention. He's going to live and not die. But as that week went, his condition deteriorated. The doctors started giving us more and more information, and it became clear he is going to die and not live. Now, fortunately, in the weeks leading up, I had the privilege of leading my dad to the Lord. So he's alive, right? And I've shared this before. So it's time for the funeral, and I'm going to do the funeral. And I've joked about this off and on through the years. You know, some of my family's like, are you going to do the funeral? How could you do the funeral? And I'm like, he paid for my Bible college. It's the least I can do, right? Which is just a beautiful picture of the Lord. That my dad, who didn't know the Lord, funded my ministry school so that one day I would be equipped to lead him to the Lord. That's just the way the Lord works, right? He's really good that way. So I mustered up everything I could to say what I felt needed to be said about my dad at the funeral. And then we go to the graveside. And at the graveside, it's pretty well the same thing every graveside you go to. There's a finality looming in the air. This particular day, December 1st, was cloudy, overcast, cold. It was everything that a graveside ceremony looks like. And I said all of the things that you usually say, and everybody began to file out from under the awning, making their way to the automobiles. And I was one of the last to leave. And anybody that's ever been at a graveside ceremony knows you look back and there's a big pile of dirt, usually with some type of tarp over it, in just some awkward, uncomfortable way of trying to cover up what's about to happen. And I looked back at that pile of dirt, and I knew when the last one of us pulls off this lot, these grave workers are going to begin to put this dirt on my dad's casket. And in that moment, I had a choice to make. I had a decision to make. I am either going to spend the rest of my life building my faith on that pile of dirt, or I'm going to spend my life building my faith on the rock that is Jesus. I am either going to alter what I believe because of that experience and that disappointment, or I'm going to double down on what I read in the Scriptures. And what I need some of you to hear today is there's a pile of dirt in your past. And whether you realized it or not, that pile of dirt changed the way you pray. It changed the way you read Scriptures. It changed the way you believe. It changed the way you see God. It changed your hope. It changed your ideas about the future. I just want to call you off that pile of dirt. You were never meant to build your life on that. I want to invite you back to the rock of Jesus. And I believe that today the Lord's going to heal some of you from that pile of dirt. But I got a little more to go. Can you hang with me a minute more? I believe that no matter what I've experienced, I'm going to stand on the Word. Jesus prayed, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He called us to pray this because it is possible in the earth. Right here, right now. Let's push on into the text. Are you good? John 11 verses 28, 29, and 32. Then she, Martha, returned to Mary. She called Mary aside and told her, the teacher is here and wants to see you. So Mary immediately went to him. Verse 32, when Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. Does that sound familiar? If you'll recall a few verses before, when Martha goes out to meet Jesus, she says, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Here Mary comes out of the same house saying the exact same thing. It sounds like sisters were talking. It sounds like in those 6 days, they were having some conversations, and the assessment they made, the logic that they found themselves arriving at is, Jesus, if you'd have been here, this wouldn't have gone the way it went. Where were you? I don't want to impose too much into the text. I don't want to infer too much into their emotions. But clearly it was an emotional moment. And if you've ever been emotional, you've likely said some things that you wouldn't have said when you were not in an emotional state. I don't know if anybody's ever done that. I don't know for sure, but there feels like there is a hint of accusation in the air. It feels like in their conversation they have come to the collective conclusion that Jesus, you have disappointed us because you are the one that could have took care of this, but you didn't show up on time. Where were you? What happened? What's going on? Let's go all the way back to why. It feels like they're criticizing him. It feels like they're making an accusation, filing a complaint, uttering frustration, declaring anger, grieving. You know, some of us have come to this place of belief through, I believe, a lot of bad teaching, that we have to cross every verbal T and dot every mental I in order for God to move on our behalf. Some of us in this room feel like we forfeited God's promises because we didn't say everything perfectly and think everything perfectly. I just want to submit to you, Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha came to Jesus. Martha hears Jesus say, I'm going to make him rise again. And she's like, sure, in heaven. That wasn't the right thing to say. The right thing to say would have been like, yep, let's go right now. That would, one day in heaven was not the right thing to say. Jesus, where were you? If you'd have been here, why didn't you? That's not exactly the right attitude to have, is it? Some of us feel like we forfeited things from God, and I just want you to know that the enemy will come heap condemnation on you and cause you to take blame for something that wasn't your fault, so that you will spend the rest of your life with muted prayers and diminished faith because you think you're the cause of what happened. It's a lie from the devil. And some of you need that thing broken off of you right here and right now. It's a lie that's been perpetuated in pulpits. And I want to explain what I mean by this. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, even though these ladies were having these conversations. Why? Here's another very important thing you need to know about God. A moment of doubt cannot erase a life of hospitality. People who have spent their life committed, hosting the Lord, honoring the Lord, loving the Lord, when you're going through it and you're wrestling in your mind, and half your wrestling is because the enemy is sowing doubt. The enemy is trying to pollute your mind. The enemy is trying to crash against the shores of your heart with despair. And it's not all the thoughts that come through your mind are not your fault. Some of them are plants of poison from an enemy. And so this God of ours who's loving and merciful, he's not going to stand back after all your devotion and say, well, you didn't think right on that day, so never mind. Oh, God is better than that. God is good. He's better than that. Do you think he's going to take one bad day and let that day be the narrative overriding all of the days of faithfulness that preceded it? Are you kidding me? Oh, what, are you sure, Pastor Jeremy? Let me remind you of Thomas. Remember, we read this last week, verse 16. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go to and die with Jesus. What was Thomas's nickname right there? I want you to say it. What was it? Now, what do we usually call Thomas? Isn't it just like us? To take a person's moment of weakness and let that be the defining characteristic of their life. Some of you aren't as familiar with Thomas. Thomas, when Jesus died and resurrected, some of the disciples were saying, hey, he's come back alive. And Thomas said, I can't believe unless I can see the holes in his hands and touch the holes. And so we have called him Doubting Thomas for 2,000 years. Never mind the fact that Thomas was actually nicknamed Twin, and in this particular instance, while all the other disciples were shaking in their boots and their knees were knocking, and they were trying to second guess Jesus and say, we better not go, Thomas is like, go ahead and let me die with them. Doubter? Are you kidding me? He was just hurting. He was just disappointed. He was just like all the other believers through history who suffered a setback, and you are being assaulted by a million different thoughts, and you're trying to weed through all of the thoughts. Thomas just said, I just need to see him. I just need to touch him. Now I want to juxtapose two people. There was the day Jesus came out of the grave and was walking through the garden around the grave. A woman named Mary Magdalene, one of the most devoted of Jesus' followers, showed up. She had showed up. All the other disciples were scared for their life. They were in hiding. Mary went straight to the grave. She was fine to be identified with Christ. She went to treat his dead body, and when she got there, the tomb was empty. And while she was there, she starts having a conversation with Jesus, and suddenly she's awakened. This is no ordinary gardener. This is Jesus, but he's in a glorified body. Mary, when she realized it was Jesus, Mary who was there when nobody else was, Mary who had faith when nobody else did, Mary who was devoted beyond even the most devoted of disciples, she sees Jesus. She's like A+ Christian. Christian number one, right? Ground zero Christian at the resurrection. She throws her arms up. She reaches out to embrace Jesus. And Jesus says, no, you can't touch me in my glorified state. Fast forward a few verses, Thomas is huddled up in a clandestine, secretive location, afraid for his life with the other disciples. Jesus walks through a wall to get to Thomas. And he walks right up to Thomas, who is doubting. And he says, touch it. Touch it. Some of you think God's holding out on you because you don't have perfect thoughts and you're wrestling in a season. And I just want everybody in the room to know, if you're in that season, you have a Jesus who will walk through a wall for you and say, touch it. A Jesus that in his glorified body kept the markings of pain just for the doubter to have proof. He's better than people give him credit for. He's superior to everybody's ideas. Worship team, if you'll come. You may be struggling to believe. You may not be saying all the right things. You may not be thinking all the right things. But Jesus never forgets your hospitality and friendship. He'll move on your behalf. Some of you feel like you have forfeited things. And I'm just here to say, no, don't think for a second that all of those days, all of those marbles of devotion and faithfulness you've been putting on the scale, don't think they count for nothing. Well, some of you need to hear that. Don't think all those prayers count for nothing. Don't think all those songs count for nothing. So let's get back into the text. We're going to finish here. Verse 33 through 35. When Jesus saw her, Mary, weeping, and he saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. What welled up? Anger, right? And he was deeply troubled. Verse 34, where have you put him? He asked them. And they told him, Lord, come and see. Verse 35, then Jesus wept. You know, I remember growing up, what's the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus wept. He wept. Can you quote a scripture? Jesus wept. Ha, ha, ha. All it took was 2 words to say a mountain of sentiment from heaven. It didn't take volumes. It just took 2 words to declare how God feels and what he thinks. Remember, Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. What does God look like? What does God sound like? How does God feel? How does God express himself? Jesus is the picture of God's heart to us. You know what makes these emotions peculiar, anger and weeping, is that Jesus knew the outcome. I mean, he knew, I'm going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knew, I'm about to conquer death. He knew, I'm about to do a miracle and blow all these jokers' minds. He knew it. So why was he mad and why was he crying? I mean, after all, what's the point of getting mad and what's the point of crying if you already know the outcome? But just because he knows the outcome, it doesn't mean he doesn't sympathize with your experience on the way to the outcome. Even though Jesus knew how the story would end, that didn't mean he was numb to the pain experienced by his friends. He was angry. He was angry at death that he had come to conquer. He was angry at sickness that plagued humanity since the fall. He was angry at sorrow. He was angry at the enemy who had assaulted his friends. He was angry at the serpent who conceived a plot to deceive humanity. He was angry at everything hell had thrown at the earth for century upon century. There wasn't anger at him. Some say, well, he was angry because they didn't show faith. No, he was angry because 30 to 33 years prior to this, he was born in a manger for the express purpose of looking death in the eye and saying, enough is enough. And he was angry at what the enemy had done. I don't know how to articulate this well. I don't know how to share it well, but let me try. Sorry, bud, I didn't ask you if I could tell this story. I forgot to ask. In the early years of being a parent, I was a hoverer. Any hoverers in the house? Now, you older ones, y'all, we've already talked about how y'all gave them a switchblade and a blowtorch and said, go have a good day. The rest of us, a bit of a hoverer. And we'd waited 11, 12 years to have kids. So when we had kids, like, I'm in. And so our son got into kindergarten, and they were having field day toward the end of the year. And I was going to go be at field day with him. Now, Michelle and I are a little older than most of the other parents of our kids' peers. So I'm a male at this event, and I'm pretty much the only dad at the event. And it's all a bunch of moms that are like 10 years younger than me. And it's very awkward. But I'm here for it because I'm going to be present. I knew from the jump of being a dad, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not always going to make the right decisions. I'm not always going to have the right attitude. I'm not always going to have my emotions in check. But one thing I can do is always be there. To always be present. So I'm going to be present. I'm at field day, and it was an awesome day. We're playing games. You know, they're running around cones. You know, they're throwing hoops onto cones. And, I mean, it's just, we're having fun. This is just a happy-go-lucky day. I mean, aside from my own awkwardness, I'm just watching him with his classmates have a good time. But we eventually get to one of the games, and everything bogs down. And we're having to wait. And as we're waiting, the kids are getting a little restless. Well, he sits down on the ground, crisscross applesauce. That's what they call it now. We used to call it something else, but it's not politically correct anymore. Crisscross applesauce, sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. Minding his own business, good kid. I mean, he doesn't get in trouble. Had never gotten in trouble. Just a great kid. You know, other kids, they clip down. You know, they come home with an orange or a red sticker. Always green, always good. Never bother nobody, never mess with nobody. Well, this group of 3 or 4 other boys start coming up to him. And at first they're just kind of tapping him and messing with him and running off. And I'm watching thinking, this feels like they might be messing with him, but I don't want to just jump in and fix everything. You know, as a parent, you're trying to figure out, what do I let them handle versus what do I step in on? And so I felt myself in that tension, but it's no big deal. And then those kids, they started like nudging him a little harder, and they'd run off and say that he has cooties. I didn't even know that was a thing. I know this, he ain't got them. He ain't got a cootie one. Cootie-free house. I know that much. So the devil is a lie. Trying to put some identity on him. Now I'm getting a little agitated. I'm looking around for the teacher. Where's she at? She over chatting with her friends. I'm getting a little bothered, but I'm watching. And again, I'm just, do I step in? Do I intervene? Or do I just let him tough it out? I'm starting to question, have I done an adequate job of preparing him for the mean streets of kindergarten? Like, I have failed my son. I haven't taught him how to take care of himself. I hadn't taught him how to fend for himself. Like, I have failed as a dad. And when you're earlier in parenthood, everything feels like, oh my gosh, they can't do this, I failed. Oh, good, they did that, I failed. I'm thinking I'm a horrible dad. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. These little, burgeoning bullies are messing with him, and I don't know what to do. I just hold my ground. I'm standing right behind him. Like, literally, all of this is happening on my watch. I'm standing right there, but I'm just locked in. I'm not going to intervene. He's got to learn how to handle himself. He's got to toughen up. He's got to deal with his own situations. I can't step in. I'm not there with him 24 hours a day. He's got to figure it out on his own. He can't grow if I do everything for him, right? And then one of the kids, I can tell you the kid's name. I'm still holding a grudge. One of the kids had a hat that day, and he took his hat off, and he comes up to my son, and he rears back, and he hits my son on top, unprompted. My son has not said a single thing. He's not done a thing, nothing. Kid takes his hat off and pulls back and hits my son on the head with his hat as hard as he can. On the top of a ball cap, there's that little button. And I literally heard that button click on his head. And then something else clicked. And I went from controlled and trying to process what the best thing to do as a dad to out of my mind in that playground. I yelled, "Hey kid, that's my son. You get away from him. You stand over there. I don't want you to look at him again, much less say another word. If I see you near him again, I'm going to lose it on you." I just came unhinged. Some of y'all don't know me like that, but a couple of these that have worked for me a little while, they know that. Pastor A.T. done raised his hand. He has seen the other side. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Like, he knows. It just clicked. I lost it. Like, something happened. I'm yelling as loud as I can at somebody's 5-year-old. I come to my senses. Oh, my Lord, what have I done? All of the emotions. And, of course, my first thought was like, oh, man, I shouldn't have did that. I yelled at somebody's kid. I yelled out here on the playground. And then I thought, no, where's the teacher? I hope she comes over here. I'll let her know, too. Where was you? Where you been? And then I thought, well, what if his mom comes over here? Good, come on, sis. You the reason he's acting like this. Get your junk together. I was out of my mind. And I don't know that that's what Jesus felt, but I feel like there's some shred of truth in that. That when the enemy comes and harasses you, God in His infinite wisdom will at times lock His feet in, but He's always right behind you. And He's watching, and He'll let you endure. He'll let you kind of go through some of the harassment and hazing of the enemy. He'll watch the enemy try to put a false identity on you. But there comes a point when your God, your Father, your Daddy in heaven watches the enemy go a step too far, and something snaps on the inside of him. And that anger at the enemy wells up, and he begins to shout at your adversary, "Enough is enough. Get on over there. Don't talk to them. Don't touch them. I don't even want you to look at them anymore." Does he feel that way about me? I believe with every ounce of my being he does. I believe with everything in me that you have a God who is angry on your behalf and who weeps over you. He knows what He's going to do in your life. He knows how He's going to bring it to conclusion. He knows all of the offshoots of the thing that He does. He knows all of the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, if you will, the ramifications. He knows everything that's going to happen. But when tears course down your cheeks, don't you dare think that He is not a God who weeps with you. Well, why don't he fix it? Why don't he handle it? Why don't he take care? Listen, stop asking why and look at the tear marks down his face. He cares for you. He cares for you. This was a long way around today to say he wants to heal some of your hearts if you'll let him. Some of you have a pile of dirt. And that pile of dirt has hindered your prayers. That pile of dirt has been boundaries around your faith, and they have shrunk your faith. Some of you, because of the pile of dirt, strongholds of the enemy have developed in your mind because you started believing things about God, or the enemy put thoughts in your mind that kept you from knowing God the way he intended you to know. But today is a day strongholds come down. Today is a day that the deception of the enemy is broken. Today is the day that some of you, Jesus goes back to that place on your timeline, that pile of dirt, and he heals your heart. So that for the rest of your life, your faith is not bullied by that happening, but that your faith is fortified by Jesus and the foundation of the fact that all things are possible with him. I really in my spirit believe that there is a supernatural impartation in the room. For those that would receive it, can you close your eyes?